Oresto Shillitoni was born October 22, 1890 in Foggia, a poor city in South Italy. He was the second boy born to Michele Shillitoni, a shoemaker by trade, and Angiola Versico. The name Oreste has its origins in Greek mythology. Orestes was the son to Agamemnon and sought revenge for his father's killing. His last name Shillitoni originated from the town of Scilla in Calabria, Italy. The Shillitoni family, along with hundreds of thousands of other southern Italians, made the decision to leave their economically depressed homeland and venture across the Atlantic to the United States. In 1895, the 5-year-old Oreste joined the brutal boat passage to the US, where hundreds of people were crammed next to one another in stench-filled compartments, were surrounded by disease and seasickness, and served atrocious food.
Upon arriving in New York, Michele Shillitoni's cousin, also named Michele, who had arrived a few years earlier, welcomed them at the port and helped them get situated in their new city. Most Italian immigrants who arrived in New York City settled in the ghettos of East Harlem and the Lower East Side, both of which were filthy, run-down slums filled with tenement buildings and rampant with crime.
Michele Shillitoni and his family settled on Mulberry Street. Mulberry Street was a congested and noisy stretch of Little Italy which was lined with tenement buildings where large families packed into small apartments. The area was riddled with violence and murders and controlled by organized crime figures.
Michele Shillitoni soon became a member of the Camorra, a secret society which may date back as far as the 1400s in Italy. The Camorra is a disciplined and feared criminal organization which abides by internal codes similar to the Sicilian Mafia but with different structures. The Camorra used a practice known as the Black Hand, which was a method of intimidation used to extort local businesses as well as local immigrants. Michele Shillitoni would become a padrone, which is a leader within the organization. At the time, there were 10 Camorra Padrones which ruled New York City. 3 ruled in Harlem, 3 ruled on Mulberry Street, and 4 ruled the Navy Street gang in Brooklyn. Padrones were all wealthy and powerful men who owned many tenement buildings and ran illegal businesses as well as legal ones.
Oresto Shillitoni would become known by a variation of his first name and was called Oresto. He attended the overcrowded and severely understaffed schools in the Lower East Side, which were inundated with immigrant kids who struggled to overcome language barriers. At age 9, he got his first real job at a paper box factory, which earned him the nickname the Paper Box Kid.
Oresto would leave work and school and take to a life of crime very early on. In 1903, at 12 years old, he was sentenced to 1.5 years at the New York Catholic Protectorate, which was a large religious-based reform school in the Bronx. The Protectorate had trade schools where Oresto learned to be a tailor, tinsmith, and plumber's assistant. His academic report showed his English skills as being good, and in July of 1904, he was released after serving his full 18 months. During the day, Oresto ran the streets with his older brother Giovan Battista, known as Johnny Shields, and at night he took classes at Cooper Union. Oresto was a very smart kid who had a proficiency in English well past that of his Italian immigrant peers. By now, Oresto also had 2 younger brothers, Saverio, known as Sammy, and Alfredo, known as Freddie. In October of 1904, at the age of 14, Oresto was sent to the New York House of Refuge to serve a 2-year stint for a 3rd-degree burglary charge. The House of Refuge was a rough place where kids were harshly disciplined, with punches, solitary confinement, and being forced to stand for up to 16 hours straight. Reports showed that kids swallowed screws, cut their arms, drank ammonia, and tried to strangle themselves with anything they could fashion a rope from. Back then, children were also given cocaine and heroin to cure all kinds of health ailments before it was regulated by New York City.
In March of 1907, at the age of 16, he was paroled from the House of Refuge and went right back to the streets.
Oresto stood a mere 5'1", 125 pounds, but was feared by kids twice his size. He was known to be ferocious, and even if you beat him up, he wouldn't stop until he found you and would exact revenge on you any way he could.
Oresto Shillitoni's unique and often misspelled name earned him numerous aliases in the police department, the courts, and the newspapers. In the streets, he was known as Harry Shields or the Paper Box Kid.
In January of 1909, the incorrigible Oresto was arrested again, this time for grand larceny, and on March 29th, he was sentenced to his first upstate stint, a term of 3 years and 6 months to be served at Sing Sing prison. The 18-year-old Oresto had graduated from the harshness of reform schools to the big time of state prison.
Sing Sing was a savage place more fit for animals than humans. There were no toilets, so inmates were housed with buckets of excrement for up to 16 hours inside cold, dark, and damp cells which contained toxic levels of carbon monoxide. The New York Health Department required a minimum of 400 cubic feet for any human habitation, but Sing Sing cells were less than half of that.
Life at Sing Sing wasn't for the faint of heart, but Oresto was a different breed. He was a hardened young man with ice in his veins and an immensely strong willpower. He had the type of metal to withstand anything that tried to break him. He served out his sentence in routine fashion, sticking to his daily regimen and commiserating with the other imprisoned Italian gangsters. He was paroled from Sing Sing on November 18, 1911. Now 21 years old, he had spent most of his adolescence in jail or reformatories, starting at the age of 12. These institutions seem to have only taught Oresto the toughness he needed in order to endure the repercussions which coincided with living his true gangster nature.
Back in Manhattan, it was now a thriving time for gangs which could be found all over the city, such as the Eastmans, headed by Jewish gangster Monk Eastman. The Gopher Gang, where Irish gangster Oni Madden got his start. And the largest and most feared of them all, the infamous 5 Points Gang, which spawned some major underworld figures such as Al Capone and Lucky Luciano. Oresto became part of the Camorra Street Gang, who were known as the most dangerous gunmen in the city and also made a lucrative business out of selling guns. Oresto was a gunslinger who could shoot proficiently with both hands, and his weapons of choice were the nickel-plated Colt hammerless 1903 and 1908 models.
On May 3, 1913, it was grand opening night at Parato's Cafe, a pool hall cafe combination which once stood right here behind me at 235 Mulberry Street. Michele Shillitoni and other local gangsters were here getting free food and drinks. Also in attendance was a flashy Sicilian gangster from the Eastman gang named John Rizzo.
John Rizzo had procured a gun from Oresto's gang but never made payment on it. Michele Shillitoni was aware of Rizzo's non-payment, and when he noticed Rizzo in the pool hall, he approached him and demanded that he cough up the money, but the drunken Rizzo dismissed him and shoved him with a pool stick.
The Padrone of Mulberry Street was not going to allow such disrespect.
Michele then went to a saloon next door and informed Oresto of the situation. Oresto came to the cafe and confronted Rizzo, who scoffed at the small young man's demands. Michele then returned to his home to retrieve a revolver and gave it to his son. Oresto waited outside of the cafe for Rizzo to emerge, and when he did, the two got into a heated exchange. Oresto pulled out his revolver and shot Rizzo dead in front of a crowded street. He then signaled to a gangster associate of his who was standing nearby to help him drag Rizzo's dead body off the street. Just up the block, a rookie patrol officer named William Haney heard the gunshots, sounded his whistle, and ran towards the commotion. Oresto then abandoned Rizzo's dead body and took off, but was intercepted by Haney, who struck him in the head with a blackjack. Oresto responded by shooting him 3 times and mortally wounding him. Oresto continued his escape down Mulberry Street, only to be confronted by another responding officer named Charles Tier. Tier fired at Oresto but missed, then Oresto shot back, striking Tier in the stomach. Oresto then continued his escape along the rooftops of the buildings along Mulberry Street and then disappeared into the night. Police from the 12th Precinct immediately converged on the area and secured the scene. Of the dozens of witnesses, nobody would admit to seeing any of the shootings. Detectives theorized that there were two shooters because of the efficiency of the shootings. The three men shot by Oresto were all admitted to St. Vincent's Hospital. John Rizzo was pronounced dead on arrival. He was out on $2,000 bail at the time for shooting a tailor with his unpaid gun. 26-year-old patrolman William Haney was also pronounced dead on arrival. Officer Tier, who was clinging to life, was incapable of conveying the events that took place.
In the coming days, while police frantically tried to piece together what happened, 36-year-old patrolman Charles Tier passed away from his injuries. The police soon concluded that this was the work of one man, and that one man was Oresto Shillitoni.
The double police homicide set off one of the largest and most intensive manhunts in the history of New York City. Off-duty officers reported to the precinct. Bridge crossings on both sides of Manhattan were shut down. Every exit out of New York City was manned by police, and even boat ports were blanketed by undercover officers. The police department quickly issued a booklet with pictures and full description of Oresto Shillitoni and distributed it along with his fingerprints to police departments and newspapers nationwide. Headlines from all of New York's newspapers covered the manhunt. Oresto Shillitoni was now the most wanted man in New York and soon the entire United States.
Over the next 6 weeks, while Oresto evaded capture, the police detained hundreds of people and arrested anyone with similar traits to Oresto. There were supposed sightings of him all over New York. Gangsters throughout the city were not happy with Oresto due to the unwanted pressure that his shooting had put on them. Yet even still, nobody offered up any information on him. Oresto was hiding out in a property in Harlem owned by his father's cousin, Michele, when his older brother Johnny told him that their father had been indicted for complicity and their younger brother had been arrested for a burglary charge. That's when Oresto suggested that Johnny go to the police and arrange the conditions of his surrender. First, the commissioner would have to give his word that his father would not be implicated in the incident. Next, he would have to be treated with respect and not abused by any of the cops. And lastly, his 14-year-old younger brother Sammy would have to be released on the burglary charge. Oresto then contacted a news reporter and told him to meet him at the Manhattan House of Detention at 125 White Street, which was known as the Tombs due to its Egyptian-style architecture. He had the reporter take a picture of him smiling arm in arm with his brother Johnny with the tombs in the background, which was a busy courthouse, all in broad daylight. The wily Oresto was going to use these pictures as incentive. If the commissioner didn't agree to his stipulations, he informed the news reporter to release those pictures, which would show the country's most wanted man right in front of the police's nose, which would bring tremendous shame and outrage on the commissioner and the police department. With the terms of his arrest settled, on June 14, 1913, Oresto Shillitoni, dressed in a black suit, wearing a straw hat and smoking a cigar, surrendered to authorities at 9 a.m. sharp at the corner of Morningside Park. He was brought back to the police headquarters, and as agreed upon, he was treated respectfully.
He was transported to the Tombs, which had cells in deplorable condition and cell blocks that reeked of human waste. The Tombs was originally designed to accommodate a maximum capacity of 350 prisoners, but would regularly house up to 2,000 prisoners. It had very little ventilation, and in the summer it was a stench-filled, sweltering hellhole.
This would be Oresto's home as he awaited trial, another subhuman living condition that he had grown accustomed to since the age of 12. Finding witnesses to testify against Oresto was difficult, but authorities were determined.
Through old-fashioned police pressure and intimidation, they would eventually get 5 people to testify about witnessing the shootings, with the chief witness being a 16-year-old girl who witnessed the crimes from her window.
After running from the law, 5 prior convictions, and 5 witnesses testifying against him, it was a foregone conclusion as to what the verdict would be. At the end of the trial, the jury deliberated for only 90 minutes and returned a verdict of guilty. On March 3, 1914, Oresto Shillitoni was sentenced to death.
He was transported to the notorious death house at Sing Sing Prison. Described as being escape-proof, the death house was yet another ominous and dreadful place where Oresto would have to reside. The inmates struggled to contain their scattered brains as they awaited their deaths. They could feel the electric currents powering the old Sparky electric chair as inmates before them were executed. They chain-smoked, had mental breakdowns, walked in circles, and talked to themselves while they awaited their scheduled death sentence.
Oresto knew that his execution could be canceled or postponed if he was deemed mentally unfit, so he routinely faked bouts of insanity. He would scream hysterically, smash tables against his cell bars, and bang his head against the walls.
The prison doctor was ordered to perform a psychological evaluation on Oresto. His impression: very intelligent. He is capable of feigning insanity. Intense and extreme swings in emotion may be act to appear insane. Extreme sense of being, purpose, and ambition. He has the intensity of a prisoner I've never seen before. His eyes dictate that he wants to act out his intention of killing.
A little over 2 years after his conviction, Oresto's one automatic appeal was denied, and his execution was set for June 30th, 1916. On June 21st, 1916, Oresto's older brother Johnny and Johnny's wife arrived at the Sing Sing visitation area to meet with Oresto. At the time, only male visitors were pat down as there were no female guards. They met with Oresto in a visitation cell where they were separated by a steel mesh. After a 2-hour visit, Johnny and his wife exited the jail and Oresto returned to his prison cell. Later that same day around midnight, Oresto called for jail guard Daniel McCarthy to bring him a slop bucket so he could relieve himself. When McCarthy entered the cell, Oresto pulled out a revolver. He pointed the gun at his stomach and demanded his keys. As little conscience as Oresto possessed, he actually liked guard McCarthy and didn't want to hurt him. But when McCarthy tried to wrestle the gun away from him, Oresto didn't hesitate to shoot him in the gut. He then commenced to make his escape through the prison. Upon hearing gunfire and McCarthy's cries for help, 2 guards in the next cell block rushed towards the door which separated them, where they encountered Oresto with a gun. They braced their bodies against the door to prevent Oresto from opening it, and Oresto fired 6 shots, hitting one of the guards twice in the arm. Oresto burst through the door, raced after the guards, and ordered them to raise their hands. He marched them into the cell of a fellow death row inmate, snatched their keys, and locked them in together. Oresto freed himself through all the locked doors, darted across the exercise yard to a 20-foot high wall, where he placed a bench against it and scaled over into the general rec yard of Sing Sing's prison. As he ran across the baseball field in the prison's main yard, Sing Sing's Big Ben siren began to blast.
Now a 12-foot high iron fence was all that stood between him and freedom. Oresto scaled the fence, abandoned his prison uniform, then jumped into the frigid waters of the Hudson River and began swimming in the darkness of the night with the sound of sirens and gunshots glaring in the background.
At the north side of the prison, a fresh set of clothes and a getaway car awaited him. However, the disoriented Oresto swam in the opposite direction and wound up on the south side of the prison. As he exited the waters, soaking wet and only in his underwear, Oresto made his way towards the lit structures nearby. With the sirens blasting and Oresto failing to show up, his getaway driver took off. Oresto made his way up a dark hillside to the Ossining General Hospital. He rang the night bell for the attendant on duty, and a woman arrived to see Oresto brandishing a revolver and demanding clothes in a room. The attendant calmly played along and devised a plan to stall the escaped convict. When she retrieved a set of clothes for Oresto, she called police from a back room, while Oresto waited in the other room flipping through a newspaper. Soon police and prison guards surrounded the hospital, and Oresto, knowing that he was done for, faked another bout of insanity while he was taken into custody.
He was brought back to the death house, which was in utter chaos due to the events which had just transpired. The next day, newspapers from around the country headlined the Paperbox Kid's escape.
There were only 2 successful escapes from Sing Sing's death house. In 1893, 2 inmates named Frank Roll and Thomas Pallister overpowered 2 guards, took their weapons and keys, escaped through a ceiling hatch, scaled the prison wall, and somehow had access to a small boat, which they took down the Hudson River. A few weeks later, both men washed up ashore dead from gunshot wounds to the head, which may have been the result of an argument between the two, which led to a murder-suicide. And the other was Oresto Shillitoni, the only man to make it down the river alive. On June 26, 1916, guard Daniel McCarthy died from his injuries. Oresto, now a quadruple murderer, was back in a tightly secured death house cell, and his execution was back on schedule to take place in 4 days. Authorities questioned Oresto as to how he got that gun in his cell, and he claimed that an inmate who had recently been executed had given it to him. However, most officials believe that Oresto's brother Johnny had his wife smuggle the gun into the visitation area, and they somehow managed to get it through the steel mesh cage. Whatever the case, it's still a mystery as to how Oresto got that gun into his jail cell.
At sunrise on June 30th, 1916, Oresto was escorted from his cell down the infamous Green Mile towards the large green door which led to the death chamber. He was surrounded by extra guards and a priest as other death row inmates shouted well wishes at him. The quiet and composed Oresto replied to the inmates with, "Goodbye and God bless you all." Oresto entered through the green door at 5:51 a.m. and was strapped into the old Sparky electric chair. His last words were, "I am sorry, gentlemen, that unfortunate man died. He grabbed my gun. I am innocent of the crime of which I am charged. My brains are not right. Goodbye and God bless you all."
The room was packed with press from every New York newspaper and extra guards. Normally, Sing Sing regulations allowed for a maximum of 12 witnesses to an execution, but due to Oresto's notoriety, it was at standing room only. The 25-year-old Oresto Shillitoni, who was described by Sing Sing officials as being one of the most dangerous and stone-cold killers they ever had housed in their facility, was pronounced dead at 6:01 a.m. on June 30th, 1916. He was put to death in front of the largest audience in the recorded history of Sing Sing's death house. For some Italian immigrants like Michele Shillitoni, criminal organizations offered them a sense of belonging in a new home that they found out wasn't paved with gold and didn't welcome them with open arms. And oftentimes their children would become a reflection of their choices. Oresto Shillitoni, who was surrounded by the criminal element and hardened by the harshest of reform schools in jail, the path that his life would take wasn't hard to envision, although that path far exceeded that of even some of the most infamous outlaws. Oresto's escape from Sing Sing prompted major reforms and a construction of a new state-of-the-art facility. They added women guards to search all female visitors for contraband. The new Sing Sing death house was completed in 1922 with much improved conditions, and up until its closure in 1963, there were no inmate escapes at all. You could say that Oresto Shillitoni was a product of his environment, a natural-born gangster, or both. Either way, the ripple effect caused by the slight, hard-as-nails young man from Mulberry Street with numerous aliases has echoed in the annals of criminal history.